Welcome to the MSL 411, a podcast designed to equip both aspiring and experienced MSLs with the resources they need to level up their career toolkit. The heart of this podcast is to take the same industry knowledge and advice that we share with our own candidates and make it available and accessible to anyone looking for answers. So if you have questions, you've come to the right place. We're here to give you the 411. And without further ado, let's dive right in. Hello, and welcome back to the MSL 411 podcast, where we are exploring perspectives and some real-world experiences that shape careers in medical affairs. And I've really been excited about today's episode because we're talking about a pathway to the MSL role that doesn't always get a lot of attention, but for the right person, it can completely change the trajectory of your career. Today, we're joined by Rupesh Patel. He's a PharmD, and he is currently a regional medical director at Tourmaline Bio / Novartis. They were recently bought out by Novartis. Rupesh started his career in retail pharmacy and spent nearly 2 decades in that space before making the leap to medical affairs. And he did that through a contract MSL role. What I love about his story that we're going to hear more about today is that it's so relatable, but it's also just really honest. He's worked the long hours that people associate with retail pharmacy, the high volume environment, the burnout that so many pharmacists experience that you hear about today. And he found a way not just to transition into industry, but to build a really successful career there. So we're going to be talking today about what that transition looks like, why it's so hard to break in, especially from the retail side, and how contract roles maybe can serve as a really powerful stepping stone if you approach them in the right way. Rupesh, so glad to have you joining us here today. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So excited to be here.
Well, before we jump into all things medical affairs, I do want to start just getting to know you and letting our listeners get to know you a little bit outside of your resume. So you've done a lot in your career, of course, but on a personal level, what's something that people might never guess about you?
Outside of pharmacy, I actually got a pilot's license back in a long time ago, '01. I'm aging myself right now. I was interested in planes and just got a private pilot's license and flew for a little bit after that, but haven't done much of that after getting married and having kids. So,
well, that's amazing. I mean, you could probably work that into the whole travel aspect of the MSL role if needed, I guess. But that's kind of a really cool side thing to do. So one thing that you mentioned when we were talking about this episode is that you are a dad of 3 girls, and you have 3 girls who all share the same birthday, which I don't think a lot of people can say unless they're triplets. But what's been the most unexpected part of that girl dad life for you?
learning how to braid hair. I had to watch some videos. So the girls are in gymnastics and they have to have their hair braided. My wife didn't braid it in the morning, and so I was trying to get one of the neighbors to one of the moms to come braid it, and no one was available. So I just watched like a 2-minute YouTube video, and now I can braid hair. And it's just funny how many times I let them put makeup on me, paint my nails. I'll wash it off before I go outside, but just the things that I allow.
Nice. Yeah, I've always had the hair braiding skills, having long hair myself, and then lo and behold, we had a boy, and they've just gone to waste. But I think that's so neat when dads take the time to learn those things to really have that bond with their girls. And another thing that you mentioned in that conversation, which I thought was so funny, is that you mentioned that your wife keeps duct tape around because you talk so much, which I feel like could actually be a strength as an MSL. But how true is that, and what did you mean by that?
She rolls her eyes a lot. We're very different in that aspect. I'm very extroverted, and she's a little bit more on the introverted side. So I tend to talk a lot more than she does. Sometimes she just looks at me and she's like, "Why are you still talking?" I have stories about everything in my life, and so she just looks at me with a lot of eye rolls sometimes.
So after the 70-hour work weeks of that retail pharmacy life, and now being in the medical affairs world where it's busy just on a different level, what does a good day off look for you right now?
Well, spending a lot of time with my family, going to the gym while they're at school and stuff, and just really spending time with them. Obviously on the weekends the kids are home. On the weekdays they're at school. So on the weekend, just spending all day with the family, just getting some stuff done. Days, going to the gym. The girls come home from school, ride bikes, just do whatever they want. They love being outside. So.
Well, okay, so let's rewind a little bit and talk about your career path, because this is where we want to spend a lot of our time, and a lot of our listeners are really going to connect with your story. Take us back to your time in retail pharmacy. What did your day-to-day life actually look like back then?
Yeah, so it was very busy. Some weeks, we worked 70 plus hours and we had the weekend to work. Usually I'd work doubles, so that just depends on how we were scheduled, but it'd be anywhere from 12 to 14-hour shifts, no breaks for the longest time. So, they were tough. And as anyone that's worked in retail knows, we never have enough help. So it's just constant from, you open until close. I mean, and a lot of times I had to stay after to get caught up. So it was tough. I did retail for 19 years. I was intern for 4 years and 15 as a manager. A lot of it was rewarding for me when I got to speak to patients. I got to know a lot of patients on a personal level. It was really rewarding, but it's tough.
At what point did you start thinking, okay, maybe this is not for me? Maybe I want to do something a little bit different?
Yeah, so after the twins were born, working 14-hour shifts and getting home at 9 in the evening when their bedtime's at 7, and my wife, she's an attorney, so she works quite a bit too. So having to kind of balance that, and then she'd have to do pretty much everything all day on the days I worked. So, and then as far as like weekends, I was working every other weekend. So I was missing a lot of nights and weekends, at time with the kids. So that's
Mhm.
when I was like, maybe it's time for me to start looking.
Yeah, especially in those formative years when the kids are young and there's so much to do. The ability to tag team more with your spouse is probably very much appreciated by your wife, I know, but just her having a busy job too, like you both being able to kind of pitch in a little bit more. When did you first come across the MSL role, and how did you learn about it, and what was your initial reaction to learning about that role?
So a couple months before, so probably the summer of 20, so right in the height of COVID. So I started looking at just different opportunities and stuff. Prior to COVID, I was actually being interviewed at a hospital system to manage a bunch of the ER pharmacies, and I was one of the final candidates. But then COVID hit, and they ended up freezing all their hiring, and so that didn't work out. I was really looking forward to that, so I just started exploring different things after that. I wasn't actively applying; I was kind of looking, but during COVID, a lot of people weren't hiring, so I started reading on different jobs, and I came across the NSL position. So I read a ton about it, watched a bunch of videos on it, and I'm like, this is something that kind of I would be really interested in.
Well, you mentioned earlier when we were discussing this that you didn't even think landing in industry was realistic at first. What about it made it seem kind of out of reach from where you were?
Looking at descriptions, so when you're looking at jobs in as an MSL, a lot of them require say relevant experience for X number of years, minimum 2 years as an MSL, which I did. Is trying to break into that role to get experience, which a lot of people aren't willing to take, and a lot of them wanted clinical experience, whether it was hospital. A lot of them wanted residencies, which I didn't have. So I never thought that I'd ever be an MSL because I didn't have that unless I went back and did a residency or worked in a hospital for quite some time.
Yeah. And I think that feeling that it's not attainable is something that a lot of people are probably sitting with right now and listening to this podcast. I know from the recruiting end, I get outreach from a lot of people who are in retail pharmacy thinking like, what do I have to do to break in? Like, where do I get this experience? Why is my experience not relatable to this role? Or how can I make my experience more relatable to this role rather? I'm sure you get a lot of those conversations as well. Why do you think so many retail pharmacists struggle to make this transition? And what are they missing when they try to position themselves?
Yeah, so great question. A lot of retail pharmacists are trying to become MSLs. The issue with that is, as a retail pharmacist, I always say you know a little bit about a lot of drugs. You're a clinician to a certain degree, but you're not a clinical specialist in any specific thing unless you work as a pharmacist in a specialty. So there's just so many pharmacists, retail pharmacists, trying to get in the MSL role, and when they don't have anything that distinguishes them from someone else, they're not going to be looked at, and that's just the reality of it. So one of the biggest things is trying to have something in your background that makes you more relevant.
Yeah. And I think when we get that outreach, we'll ask people, well, what are you the go to person for? What are you the specialist in? Is it oncology? Is it cardiovascular? And sometimes the mentality is, well, I work with drugs. I work with drugs that are oncology that are, for heart patients, for anxiety, psychiatric medications. Like I know it all. I can go any direction. But really, I think you hit the nail on the head that you need to be more of a therapeutic area specialist. And so, yeah, looking for ways um, that you can position yourself as that. On the flip side, of this question that we were just talking about. What actually makes someone stand out coming from that retail pharmacy background?
Some kind of clinical experience. You have to have that. Another thing is being able to talk. Being and well, communicate, I should say. So it's not just talking; it's listening. As an MSL, you got to pivot, and you got to wear several hats. So one of the biggest things is can you speak with people? Can you listen? Can you present information? In a compliant manner. The biggest thing is being able to speak with someone and communicate and kind of pivot the discussion how they want it.
Yeah. And one thing I really like about your story is that it highlights that you didn't just want the role, you did something about it that set you apart. And you kind of touched on that, but I want to go deeper into that topic because I love how your story unfolded, how it wasn't really the perfectly planned path. You got connected with a speaker bureau. Can you tell the story of how you got connected there and what that was about?
Yeah, I was actually out for dinner and a drink with my wife, and we were sitting at a bar, and there was a guy sitting not that far from me. I had no idea who he was, and I was telling my wife, some super awesome dad jokes, and the guy overheard me and said, "Man, you're funny." So we started talking. I got to know him pretty well, and he was a pharmaceutical sales rep for Amarin Pharmaceuticals, so with the CEPA. So he was like, "Hey, you know what? Come to this dinner." And I didn't really go to a lot of these dinners. But we just had some good rapport. So I showed up to this dinner and he introduced me to his boss, and I was talking to her for quite some time. And they're like, "Hey, we'd love for you to be on our speakers bureau." And I never thought that that's where they were going. I just thought they were like, "Oh, he's a cool pharmacist, let's talk to him." They asked me to be on the speakers bureau, and back then I didn't know exactly what someone did on a speakers bureau, so I had many questions for them. And obviously that was on top of my job as a pharmacist. So I gladly accepted and went through their training. So that's how I was on the speakers bureau for a year before I became an MSL.
Yeah, I mean that's crazy. That just fell into your lap, but what an opportunity. And even if it doesn't, if somebody's listening and they're like, okay, great, but that's not just going to fall into my lap, but that may be something that somebody could seek out, like look for those opportunities. I mean, things that they may not have considered. At what point did you realize how important that opportunity down the road would become for you?
I actually didn't realize it for quite some time. I mean, one of the things I did is update my LinkedIn profile. And, we talked about this earlier that I added a bunch of recruiters just because the job market's so tough these days. Applying for a job when it's going through an electronic program is not going to work. I mean, there's hundreds, if not over 1,000 people applying for a single job in some cases. So unless you have the right keywords, and it's hard to know what those are sometimes, your resume is going to get thrown out. So, I didn't realize until I got an email on LinkedIn how vital that role was for my future.
How did that experience start to bridge the gap into the MSL role? You said you got that outreach on LinkedIn, but how did that kind of transition you?
Yeah, so I updated my LinkedIn profile once I decided, hey, I need to start looking for something. Before I actively was looking for anything, I updated my LinkedIn profile. I think there's an about section and a top skills section. I think those are very important when you're looking for jobs. And also there's, the open to work. I mean, anyone that's used LinkedIn knows what that is, but that lets recruiters know, hey, you can reach out to me, and you don't need to tell your employer about that. There's like a hidden one where only recruiters can see it versus there's one that actually adds it to your picture. So there's two different ways to go about that. But I just started adding recruiters. I didn't know who they were. I was looking at big companies and just looking at recruiters for those big companies. And I just started adding a bunch of people. And, obviously people that were relevant to what I was looking for. And you recruiters know a lot of different recruiters. So I feel like there's a lot of recruiters out there, but it's also like a small field where a lot of people talk. So I was adding these recruiters. I never expected to hear back from any of them, but I'm like, maybe someone's going to be looking for something, and someone reaches out to someone, and someone's like, "Hey, this guy added me on LinkedIn." It was far fetched, but it ended up working. So I got a message on LinkedIn from a recruiter saying, "Hey, do you know anyone that wants to be a cardiovascular MSL?" And at first I didn't think she was asking me if I wanted to do it. I just thought she's just like, "Hey, do you know anyone?" Because I'm like, no, there's no way my skill set is what she's looking for. And my wife read it. She's like, "No, she's asking if you want to do it." She's like, "Respond." So I responded right away. She's like, "Can you send me your resume and get on the phone in 45 minutes?" So we were out and about. So I scrambled home, got everything ready. We talked a bunch of times. I interviewed, and I ended up getting the job, not thinking that I ever would.
I love the humility there. And as a recruiter hearing that, because I know sometimes I've worded my outreach like, hey, do you happen to know anyone looking for this? Like maybe I should be a little bit more pointed because some people might be humble like you and think, oh, gosh, they're not talking about me. They're talking, but no, it really is like, hey, are you interested? But I think your story is such a good reminder first that the end that you have is sometimes not obvious, even when it's happening, that sometimes that realization comes to you later that, hey, this was a big deal. This is actually stuff is happening. Um, and that can serve as a good lesson to people listening that it doesn't have to fall in their lap. They can look for these opportunities, but also the importance of LinkedIn and networking when you're looking for these roles. And I think a lot of people, although they try to do it, maybe they're struggling with it. And, how do you connect? How do you network? So you've given some good pointers there. If someone listening today wanted to improve their visibility, what are some action points they could do today or this week? Where should they start?
Yeah, so obviously keep your LinkedIn. First of all, get LinkedIn if you don't have it, and then use it to your advantage. Make sure it's up to date. Make sure you're writing what skills you have. I mean, if someone's just looking and you have just, hey, I worked here, so and so dates, that's not going to get you anywhere. They want to know what you did, what you're doing, and so essentially it's your resume on LinkedIn. Like I said, your about section. Tell them what you're looking for, what you've done in the past. That gives someone a quick, 2-3 sentence summary of what you've done, what you're looking for, and the skills, and really think about what you have. Obviously, you don't want to make up stuff because that's not going to go well, but really think about what you've done in the past and just put down all your skills. And as far as adding recruiters, I was looking at jobs that I potentially would want. I looked at MSL recruiters. Looked at all the big drug companies. Just started adding a bunch of people. I wasn't being annoying. I wasn't sending them, a bunch of emails saying, hey, find me a job, because that's not what they want to hear. But, if you come across a job that you really, really like, that you honestly think that you're a candidate for, there's nothing wrong with shooting them a quick email or a message on LinkedIn. But now, if you don't have the qualifications, I wouldn't be reaching out to them, because I'm sure they get a lot of those. So, but like I said, the networking part is huge, because when someone's looking for something specific, when a company wants someone specific, and in my case, the seat was cardiology, and they were looking for a cardiology MSL. And when I got that call, I was like elated. Like I said, I got to thank my wife for saying, hey, they're asking if you want to be one, not if you actually know someone. That's how she worded it, but she wants to know that you're interested in it. So thank you to her for like making me respond right away. Because like, oh, I'll get to it later. She's like, no, she wants to hear from you like now.
Yes.
Yeah, because recruiters, that I mean, they live a very fast paced life. So they don't have time to waste. So, but no, the best thing ever. Like I said, I wasn't actively looking. I was just like perusing and seeing what I needed to do. I'm updated LinkedIn. So I hate to say it fell in my lap, because I did a lot of prep for it, but it kind of fell in my lap.
Yeah. Yeah. All the work leading up to that conversation was hard work. We're not discounting that at all. The conversation fell into your lap, but then from that point forward, even it's work, 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 and all of your hard work paid off, basically. But I love your story of networking and how you went about that, how you put thought into that, and even your advice to others about getting your LinkedIn profile looking good. We've done several episodes on that. So if you're listening and want more information, we've done episodes on networking and updating your LinkedIn profile. It is your digital resume, just like you were saying. Now, should it mirror your resume? No, it's more of your opportunity to tell your story. As MSL's storytelling is so big, it's your opportunity to take your career story and tell it. It partners with your resume or your CV. It is not a duplicate of your resume or CV, but it tells the story of your career journey. So, yeah, so many good points there. And with your networking, I think you did it all the right way. And eventually, all of that visibility led to opportunity that really changed things for you. And so I want to take a moment and talk about how you entered the contract role.
So that was the recruiter that reached out to me on LinkedIn. When she reached out to me, I didn't really know like who she was. I just knew they were looking for cardiovascular MSL. So we talked on the phone for like 45 minutes or an hour, and it was a great conversation. And it was one of those things that like resonated with like pretty much everything I'm looking for. Obviously, I was not an MSL, so even though I did a ton of research, it was I didn't know every single thing they did. So she gave me a lot of good insights. So she was reaching out to me from the contract company, and I didn't know what a contract MSL was. It seemed like I was going to be obviously not a in-house employee. And at first I was concerned about that. But once I did some more research, and I'm like, this is a great foot in the field. And it seemed like a great company.
Yeah. For someone who's never explored the role of a contract MSL as a path before, maybe you can kind of shed some light there. What is a contract MSL role? I know a lot of people have heard of it, but maybe they don't know all the ins and outs. How's it different from going straight into a permanent position? Like, what are some of the pros and cons, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so a contract MSL is hired by a contract company for, it could be a temporary or a project specific contract rather than being a direct hire. by a larger, pharmaceutical company. So, depending on the life of the drug or the direction the parent company is going, you could be employed for a couple months, you could be employed for 2 years. For example, my contract was a 2-year contract. So I knew going into it, I was a 2-year contract. Now that could end earlier, or that could be extended. In my case, it got extended a couple times. But at that point, I just wanted a foot in the door, and it seemed like a great opportunity. So the fact that it was contract, really didn't bother me. A lot of people shy away from contracts, especially existing MSLs, but even some new ones. I tell people, if you're wanting to be an MSL and a contract company reaches out to you, there's nothing wrong with going, even if it's just for a couple months, because now you have a little bit of experience, and now you have something on your resume that shows that you had some MSL experience. But a lot of people shy away from it because they're like, oh, I don't want to work for that. I'd rather work for the company directly. Some pros, the salary is typically pretty good compared to a direct hire, but there's also, you don't get stock options in the bigger drug company. You may get some from the contract company, but I had a pretty positive experience with mine. So, as far as the contract goes, we got most of the stuff that the MSLs with the parent company got. We got a car, we got a little higher salary actually than a direct hire would have. So overall, it was a great experience for me. We got full benefits, so it's not like we were being skimped out on all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think you've had a really unique experience in the contract position with being transitioned to full time, which we may talk about a little bit later. So I'll save that little tidbit. But like you said, you had a great experience. Sometimes these contract roles will be for, a 2-year contract and the product does really well and they extend it. Sometimes it goes the opposite direction. But hey, you've gotten some MSL experience on your resume, and that's the foot in the door sometimes. I mean, whether you have 3 months of experience or a year of experience, it's at least showing that you have been hired, you can do the job, you've been onboarded somewhere, and that you've had some real world experience in the role. So yeah, these roles are not to be discounted by any means. They can be such a great leverage point. I think you've really explained why a lot of people tend to overlook it, but some of the arguments why they should not do that, I think, are so fantastic. Once you personally got into your first contract MSL role, what was the biggest adjustment for you coming from, of course, retail pharmacy, go life, to now you're in an MSL role, but it's a contract role. It may look a little different. What was the adjustment for you?
So I got that position. I started in November of 2020, so right in the middle of COVID. So I did not know how to work from home. I was used to going into work every day, staying on my feet for 14 hours, and I did not know how to work from home. So we were 100% remote because of COVID for probably 6 to 12 months. And so just being able to sit in the office and get stuff done. And I remember I wouldn't even take a lunch break. I would cook food the night before and warm it up in the microwave like I was so used to doing in the pharmacy. And my wife's like, look, obviously you got to attend all your meetings, do your work, but if you need to take a little bit of time for lunch, you can. Because she was working from home for like a year. She's an attorney, but during COVID she was working from home. So she had to almost train me how to, like, I could take a little bit of a break here. I was so used to just like go and doing like 10 things at once in the pharmacy that I was doing the same thing. It was like kind of stressing me out. And she's like, look, you can take a break. You can calm down a little bit. And then also like putting my computer away. Sometimes I feel like I just work too late some days. Which, when you have a place you go to work, when you come home, you're home. So sometimes like late in the nights, weekends, you get an email and you're like, oh, I got to answer this now. Well, if it's not an emergency, you don't necessarily need to. But obviously, if someone's looking for something right away, answer them. So that was the biggest transition, is just the ways of working.
Yeah. It's funny to hear that because I'd shared with you before that my background was also in retail pharmacy. And my first job outside of the pharmacy was at a pharmaceutical provider, basically, but working at a desk and sitting down to work was a hard transition for me. So that was it's almost like you're coming out of this whole different lifestyle and trying to relearn how to operate in polite society, I guess. But the theme throughout all of it, which I love, is that your wife is always your voice of reason. And so kudos to her for being that for you. But what did you focus on early as a new MSL to make sure that you were successful in this new role, this new way of life?
So we had a couple months training program. So they basically said drinking from the fire hose. So you're basically being given a lot of information. I did not know there was that much information on a single drug for a single indication. So we spent months and months learning different things and going through different articles, just reading a bunch of different journals and stuff. So it was just learning everything from the beginning and then just paying attention, taking notes. You do not want to fall behind. Then we had a certification process. And then after that, you just start MSLing. And, one of the big things I wanted from that is I wanted kind of a mentor since I hadn't done this before. So I found a couple people, because some are happy to help, some aren't. And that's just how it goes. But the people that were willing to help were very valuable.
That's great. And I think really important for a lot of people listening to hear that you need to not walk through this alone sometimes. Besides that advice, is there any other advice that you might give to somebody who's maybe starting in a contract role today?
Well, first of all, don't look at it as as a negative thing, because contracts can be, very, very good. Like you were saying before, you could be employed for a couple months. I actually referred a friend to that same recruiter that reached out to me. I said, "Hey, this guy is fantastic. He's got some clinical experience." At that point, he had interviewed for 10 different MSL roles, never got a single one. So the one I recommended him for, he ended up getting, and it was a vaccines role. But 6 months later, they were let go. But after that, he was able to get hired from that parent company for a different indication because of that 6 months of experience. So, like I said, a contract role is a really good step up into the field. And there's people that do different contracts. They'll finish a contract, they'll go to a different one. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people look down on it. They're like, "Well, you're not full time." Well, you are full time. You get paid full time. You're just not a direct hire. So there's nothing wrong with that.
And clearly, it's a good path to choose because you did this, your role turned into something bigger. Look where you are today. And I want to talk a little bit about that because you successfully transitioned from a contract to an in house role. Being at Symbio, I got to kind of cheer on from the sidelines because you work with one of my colleagues, but got to cheer on from the sidelines as that happened. But talk a little bit about that. What was that transition like from contract to an in house role?
Yeah. So while I was in my previous role, I got a call from another recruiter, which is your colleague,
Yeah.
Rochelle. And she's like, "Hey, I saw your background. She's like, you might be interested in this. It was a small biotech company." And she's like, "Is this something you'd be interested in?" I'm like, "Sure, tell me more." And that was actually initially, it was another contract role. It was a 6-month contract with STEM Bio and Tourmaline Bio. And at 6 months, they were going to either extend us or we are going to be let go or hired full time. Didn't know it was going to happen, but I read the pipeline, and it's cardiovascular disease, thyroid eye disease, and it seemed awesome. I'd never worked for. I wanted clinical trial experience is what I wanted, but once again, if you don't have clinical trial experience, it's really hard to get a position with a company that's in some kind of clinical phase. So yeah, everyone there was super friendly, both everyone with Tourmaline and SemBio that I spoke with. And so I ended up accepting that role. And we ended up at 6 months. They extended us 3 months. It ended up being 9 months contract. And then I got hired full time by Tourmaline Bio, and it was an awesome experience. That was the end goal, to be hired full time with them to take benefit of their stock and stuff like that. So no, it was a fantastic opportunity. It's been a dream job.
I know you and I had talked about this, but of course, Rochelle and Symbio helped you get your foot in the door with Tourmaline. But when it came time to negotiate your offer to go full time with them to an in house position or full time position, I mean, you negotiated that yourself, and I feel like you did really well for yourself there. We're very successful in that. Walk us through how you approached negotiating your offer.
I did ask for more stock and a higher salary, so I think I ended up getting like $25,000 more per year, plus a couple $1,000s more shares. So, I'm not going to be unrealistic. I know how many years I've been doing this. I know what the salary ranges are. And the offer they gave me initially was very generous. I just thought I could get a little bit more, and that's what happened.
Well, that's good advice, especially when you're negotiating yourself. It's a little different when you go through a recruiter because that's where transparency from on both sides is very key throughout the process. You tell them what you need, they're okay with that. They tell you what they can do, you're okay with that, and it lines up in the middle and everybody's happy. But when you're negotiating for yourself, yeah, you need to kind of be aware of what the possibilities are and ask within reason, but know your worth. So just kind of doing all of that legwork yourself and making a reasonable ask, which is on level with your experience and your reputation with the company. Since you were staying with the same company, they know you. So I think you did a really good job with that. And then on top of that, your experience also includes going through a buyout, which not everyone gets to see. But you've been through it all. So what was that like? The good and the bad? What was that experience for you?
Yeah, so we knew it was a possibility, from the beginning, and just depends on the data release. So we had a phase two um, data release, and it was very, very positive. So we had an inkling. The company I mean, they were started less than 5 years before the buyout. It was a very quick buyout. I was with them a year and a half. Most of the Med Affairs team was there less than 2 years. Um, before the buyout. But I'm definitely glad I negotiated because the stock options they fully vested within a month of the buyout, and so I got the payout because of that. So yeah, some of the positives and negatives. Obviously, positive are you're probably gonna get a decent payout. So I'm still getting paid right now. I'll be getting a severance, which is very generous too. Obviously, some of the negatives, I'll be without a job, and there's this kind of some of the people don't like the uneasiness of like not actively working all the time during this phase. And so they left, but I was given like a guarantee basically of this is what's going to happen. A lot of the people were worried about benefits because they were the had benefits to them. We go through my wife, so I wasn't concerned with that. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely pros and cons. I mean, more pros. I mean, the cons are I love the team I worked with, and we're all split up now. I'll never find a team like that. I probably will, hopefully someday, but or be back with them someday. But yeah, I mean, just knowing you're going to be without a job, the people we worked with, the CEO of the company, all the way to everyone that we worked with directly, they were just fantastic. And yeah, it'll be hard to step away from that.
Yeah, but it sounds like you've really nailed how to work well with a recruiter. You've got such great experience lined up. I mean, and hey, you've got translatable experience into a lot of different areas, to be quite honest. And so I think with the experience that you've been able to build up, that it'll be an easy transition. And it's a small world. You may end up with some of those same teammates at another company. You never know. It's a small world.
Yeah, and it was great because I got experience in clinical trials. I got experience in rare disease, which those are two different, very difficult things to get in MSLing if you haven't done any of that in the past.
That's true. The clinical trial experience, especially, and the fact that you were seeking that and interested in that when you were interviewing for jobs years ago. I mean, that's forethought that maybe some people don't have, or, something most people may not even consider when they're just trying to break in or trying to get their foot in the door or weighing the pros and cons of a contract role. What does it give you that you can put on your resume that down the road might be something that you can find marketable, something that's going to be different from just your average MSL role? Sometimes these contract roles have that kind of packaged up all nice and neat in a bow there, and you get a front seat to this unique experience that might be hard to get otherwise. So again, it goes back to don't discount these contract roles. They can be amazing opportunities that springboard into so many different areas. And so I think that it's been such a unique part of your story. But I want to talk about just the whole lifestyle shift. I want to kind of settle here for a second because you painted a really vivid picture earlier of retail, the long hours, the missed holidays, warming up your food in a microwave and eating it standing up while you're filling stuff with one hand and eating with the other. How does your life look different now? And what has this transition meant for not just you, but your family as well?
It's meant a lot. When it comes to retail, there's no work-life balance. It's just work. There was a point in time in retail where I was willing to go to any store, just do whatever I needed to do. And but when you have a family and stuff, you probably switch a little bit. Now you kind of reflect on, hey, what's important to me now? And so being an MSL, there's a huge work-life balance, and everyone understands that. I schedule things when I need to schedule them. If I need to go to the dentist, I don't have to take the entire day off of work. I'll just let my boss know, hey, I'll do that around meetings. I won't skip meetings for that, but I'll just let her know, be like, hey, I'm going to be at the dentist for an hour, and it's no big deal. Instead of having to take a day off or schedule it on your day off. But yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me is not missing stuff on nights and weekends. That's the biggest thing, or holidays. Being there for my kids. They're not going to remember all the hours I worked, but they would remember me missing out holidays or never being home. And versus now, it's like I still work, but also am home for them a lot. So that's something I did not want them to ever forget.
Yeah, and I think that part is really what hits home for a lot of people listening, especially the folks that are coming from the same background as you, who are stuck in that retail, that are burned out, just overworked, and looking for this can't be it. There has to be something different. And so just to hear that it's still work, it's still hard, but it's rewarding, it provides a little bit more of that work life balance, that flexibility that they don't have. I think that really hits home for a lot of people listening. I know that people are going to take a lot of encouragement from this episode and hearing you talk about your own experience. And I know that you mentioned that you do get a lot of messages from retail pharmacists, people who are burned out in retail pharmacy and wondering about the MSL path. Maybe they just heard about it or it's been in the back of their mind for a while. But what do those conversations usually sound like?
Yeah. So when I became an NSL, I mean, the first couple of months I got hundreds of messages. So obviously I couldn't respond to all of them, but, you know, sometimes you have to just be brutally honest with someone and be like, hey, if this is what you want, this is what you have to do. And a lot of them are not willing to do those things. So, I would tell them in my case, going from retail to an MSL, I became a speaker, but you could also do something clinical. You could go to a hospital for a couple of years or become some kind of specialist. But, a lot of people are like, no, I want the MSL job now. And just had to be brutally honest with them. Hey, you can try, but the chance of you getting it is not zero, but it's pretty slim. And you kind of have to reflect on yourself. And really see your background, especially nowadays. There's a lot of companies that have MSLs, and a lot of people want to do it.
And what is maybe, I mean, you mentioned a little bit of this, but the honest truth that people maybe don't want to hear, or the advice that you give that doesn't get followed about clinical experience? Like, let's talk about that a little bit, because
Yeah.
you do have a lot of those conversations. What are some of these hard truths that people just don't want to hear in the retail pharmacy
So,
world?
people don't want to hear that, hey, maybe right now is not the best time because they've already set their mind, hey, I want to do this now. Well, right now may not be the best time because you need something in your background that makes you pop, because there's a ton of retail pharmacists applying for these positions. And, the ones that distinguish themselves from everyone else, they're going to have a higher chance. But it's the now. People want to do stuff now. They want to make a change now. And they don't want to take a year or two to do something else to potentially make them a better candidate. And so a lot of people just end up just continuing to do what they have been doing. So that's kind of conversation I've had to have with people. I'm like, hey, you know what? Reach out to speakers bureaus. Reach out to, if you have a clinical position at a hospital, that would make you more marketable. So there's different paths. Going directly from retail to an MSL position with nothing in between, very, very difficult.
Yeah. And I think that's such a hard conversation to have with someone, because you do want to be as helpful as possible to people who are in your shoes where you were a couple of years ago. And it's so hard to have to deliver those hard truths sometimes, but a good dose of reality sometimes is needed for them to just examine, maybe re-examine. Maybe they do have that something in their background that sets them apart and they just don't know how to showcase it, or they don't see the importance of showcasing it. So I think in looking at it through that lens, it is such an instant gratification. I'm ready to make this move now. I'm burned out now. But what's something that someone could maybe start doing this month, like right now, to move closer to this path? I mean, you mentioned like looking at speakers bureaus, things like that. Are there any other things that they could be looking at or doing?
Oh, if there's any clinical stuff on the side they can do while doing retail or get a job, obviously that's, they'd have to get a completely different job. Or if they can get a part-time job at a hospital doing something clinical related, that's definitely a resume builder. And then look at their past. Like you said, sometimes they have stuff they just don't. If you don't tell people, they don't know. So look at your past, and if you have anything, put it on your resume, put it on LinkedIn. That's one thing recruiters tell me. If you think it may help, put it down, because you never know. And then, like I said, build up your LinkedIn, start networking. If a recruiter reaches out to you, that's great. And if you don't get the job, reach out to them and say, hey, how can I make myself a better candidate in the future? I mean, recruiters are there to help you out. You don't always get the job, but they're definitely happy to help. And I've never met a rude recruiter.
Thank you. Me neither. And on that, just from the recruiter's point of view, we get so much outreach from pharmacists, especially who send their resumes and they've been actively searching. And, I look at their resume and there's nothing on it that says anything therapeutically. And so it says the task that you did as a pharmacist, but if I were to categorize you in our database, it would have to be, unknown as your therapeutic area of specialty. So that's why if you're looking to position yourself, you need to have some expertise in at least one specific area. So I can say, okay, if I get a cardiovascular role, this person has some background in that. I have her labeled as a cardiovascular aspiring MSL. And so I can match her with those types of roles. But if you take a good, honest look at your resume and it doesn't scream, I'm the expert in this, then it's really hard for a recruiter to match you with roles where they are looking for an expert in this area. Maybe just as a side note here from the recruiter's point of view, taking a look at your resume and just making sure it showcases you as an expert in some area, because that's how recruiters and that's how talent acquisition specialists, that's how they seek you out. Not just that you have a PharmD, but that you are a PharmD who specializes in this therapeutic area that we happen to work in. And so I think if I could just tag that on to be helpful advice for these folks coming from the pharmacy background looking to transition, just take a good, honest look at your resume and see what you can pull out. It could be from grad school, it could be from pharmacy school, it could be papers that you've written, or presentations that you've given, or anything that can tie you to a certain disease state or therapeutic space or anything like that is better than not. So look at those areas, include that. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. Take a look back at your pre-pharmacy days, your grad school, all that, see what you can tie in. I think that's great advice. Well, I want to wrap us up here. We're coming to the end of our time. And of course, as always, I just have a couple of rapid fire questions. So we'll get started on those. So just short answers. But what is a skill from retail that has helped you most as an MSL?
Counseling and communicating, definitely.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Okay. What is the best career investment that you've made for yourself?
Time, um, time to research what roles I want. As far as like becoming a speaker's bureau, I could have just thrown it off and said, "Hey, I don't want to do this," but I really looked at how it could impact my life. Anything was going to have that much of an impact, but I knew it would help. So really, time.
Yes. But I think that's such a good one. The time spent in being intentional in the things that you sought. That's so important. Not just blindly applying to everything, but really being intentional and knowing what's going to work best for you from a family standpoint and from a career standpoint. What is one big misconception about contract MSL roles?
That they're not actual MSLs, or that they don't do what an actual MSL does. You do the exact same stuff an MSL does. And it could be a really good stepping stone to a really positive career. So never discount.
And I think you are the poster child for that, that it has worked out in your favor. It has paid off dividends for you. Your career is onward and upward. And it all started from retail pharmacy and the contract MSL role. So, I hope this gives our listeners a lot of encouragement, especially coming from that same place. Rupesh, this was such a great conversation. I so appreciate you sharing your journey. I think what stands out most is just how real it is, and how many people are probably listening and seeing themselves in your story right now. So, to everyone listening, if you've ever felt like your background might be a barrier, I hope that this episode gives you a very different perspective or some things to think about, ways to re-examine your experience in a little different light. There isn't just one path into medical affairs, and sometimes the path you don't expect ends up being the one that gets you there. So be sure to not discount some of these out of the box kind of roles. If this episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear from you. There, of course, is a link in the show notes below where you can share your thoughts, your questions, or even your own journey if you want to share with us a little bit. And Rupesh, thank you so much again for joining us and being so generous with your time today.
Linda, it was great speaking with you. Thank you so much. Hopefully, I gave some good tips for people that are aspiring to break into the MSL role.
Thank you so much for tuning in to MSL 411, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to share the link, let your friends know, and of course, connect with us on LinkedIn. And if you want more information on today's topic, please feel free to reach out. Be sure to check back soon as we continue to explore the topics that matter most to you in medical affairs.